Competitive strategy versus antitrust policy. Managers deploy strategy to lead their firms to compete, but antitrust officials influenced by economics and law sometimes get in the way by accusing firms such as Microsoft of being anti competitive. Most business school students do not study antitrust policy. When they graduate and become managers, they do not care about either. Antitrust officials, on the other hand, tend to study economics and law but not business. A background in economics and law, however, does not give antitrust officials an intimate understanding of how firm-level competition and/or cooperation unfolds, which is something that a business school education provides. These officials often believe that in the absence of government intervention, specifically antitrust action, competitive advantage of large firms is likely to last forever and that monopoly will prevail. Managers know better. Given rapid technological changes, ambitious new entrants, and strong global competition, no competitive advantage lasts forever, even in the absence of government intervention. It is possible that none of the antitrust officials has ever studied a global business textbook like this one, but officials who have a static and unrealistic view of the sustainability of competitive advantage end up deciding and enforcing the rules governing competition. Such a disconnect naturally breeds mutual suspicion and frustration on both sides. Business school students and managers will be better off if they arm themselves with knowledge about antitrust concerns and engage in intelligent conversations and debates with officials and policymakers. Because the U.S. has the world's oldest antitrust frameworks dating back to the 1890 Sherman Act, the U.S. debate is the most watched in the world. So rather than adopting a U.S. centric approach, here we treat the U.S. debate as a case study that may have global ramifications. In fact, antitrust issues which originated from a domestic orientation have been globalized recently. On behalf of managers, concerned management scholars have made four arguments. First, antitrust laws were often created in response to the old realities of mostly domestic competition. The year 1890 for the Sherman Act is not a typo for 1990. However, the largely global competition today means that a large dominant firm in one country, think of Boeing, does not automatically translate into a dangerous monopoly. The existence of foreign rivals such as Airbus forces the large domestic incumbent to be more competitive. Second, the very actions accused of being anti competitive may actually be highly competitive or hyper competitive. In the 1990s, the hyper competitive Microsoft was charged with anti competitive behavior. Its alleged crime? Not voluntarily helping its competitors. It is puzzling why Microsoft should have voluntarily helped its competitors. Just imagine, if your manager were to ask you to voluntarily help your firm's competitors, would you just do it or would you think that your manager was out of his or her mind? Third, U.S. antitrust laws create strategic confusion. Because the intention to destroy your firm's rival is the smoking gun of antitrust in case, managers are forced to use milder language. Don't say or write a memo that says, "We want to beat our competitors." Otherwise, managers could end up in court. In contrast, non-US firms often use warlike language. Komatsu is famous for encircling Caterpillar, and Honda for annihilate, crush, and destroy Yamaha. The inability to talk straight creates confusion among lower level managers and employees in US firms. A confused firm is not likely to be aggressive. Finally, U.S. antitrust laws may be unfair because these laws discriminate against U.S. firms. In 1983, if GM and Ford had proposed to jointly manufacture cars, antitrust officials would have turned them down, citing an obvious intent to collude. The jargon is per se, in and of itself, violation of antitrust law. Ironically, starting in 1983, GM was allowed to jointly make cars with Toyota. Now, 30 years later, Toyota is the number one automaker in the US. The upshot? American antitrust laws have helped Toyota but not Ford or GM. One country's or region's antitrust laws may be used against other countries' firms. For example, the EU antitrust authorities have been very harsh on US firms, stopping the merger between GE and Honeywell, and severely fining Microsoft and Intel. While these actions provoked protests from the American side, they are at least understandable from a protectionist standpoint. What is difficult to understand is the reason why sometimes US firms are discriminated against by their own government. The most recent case in point, in 2011, AT&T was forced to abandon its merger of T-Mobile, a wholly owned subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom, and was forced to pay a $3 billion breakup fee to T-Mobile. A US firm was thus forced by the US government to subsidize a foreign firm, which did not even want to compete in the US anymore. Why has Microsoft been the subject of so much close government scrutiny? Ethical Dilemma, Emerging Markets 11.1. From Trade Wars to Antitrust Wars. In the 21st century, trade wars are often threatened but seldom fought. However, a new style of trade war centered on protectionism is on the rise. These new trade wars are increasingly known as antitrust wars because antitrust policy, which historically focuses on domestic competition, has been used to score international points. In 2001, the EU antitrust authorities vetoed the proposed merger of two US-based firms, GE and Honeywell. In 2009, the EU fined Intel a record $1.45 billion for alleged anti-competitive conduct against its smaller US-based rival, AMD. In 2004, the EU fined Microsoft $660 million for bundling its own media player with Windows and thus excluding market access for Real Networks, which is a US-based rival. In 2009, the EU prosecuted Microsoft for tying Windows with its own web browser, Internet Explorer, and stifling competition from other browsers, exactly the same alleged crime as pursued by US authorities a decade ago. The only viable US competitor from the earlier US case against Microsoft, which is Netscape, had essentially vanished by 2009, accounting for less than 1% of browsers' usage. This time, the EU case against Microsoft was triggered by a complaint from Opera Software, an Oslo, Norway-based browser maker. In comparison with Explorer's 86% global browser market share in 1999, the 2009 case came at a time when Microsoft's dominance in the browsers was weakened. In 2009, Explorer only had 68% of the global market, and its nearest competitor, which was Firefox, developed by the US-based Mozilla, enjoyed 20%. In Europe, Microsoft was even weaker, with Explorer accounting for only 60% of the market, followed by Opera's 5% and Firefox 3%. Overall, the EU antitrust authorities appear to more vigorously pursue leading US firms, suggesting a potential protectionist undertone. Not to be outdone, the fledgling Chinese antitrust authorities entered the foray by starting to enforce China's new anti-monopoly law in 2008. Mergers of firms not headquarters in China, as long as their combined China turnover reached 120 million in the previous year, had to be cleared by Chinese authorities. For example, the merger between the Belgian-based InBev and the US-based Anheuser-Busch was approved by the Chinese authorities, subject to some conditions. What was controversial was the very first decision to stop an acquisition announced in 2009, the proposed acquisition of China's leading fruit juice maker, Huayan, by Coca-Cola. At $2.4 billion, the price was 50 times Huayan's expected earnings in 2008 and a 200 premium to Huayan's share price. Huayan's delighted owners agreed to sell. The only party blocking the transaction was the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. The ministry cited the adverse impact on small and medium-sized domestic juice makers as a major reason. In other words, protectionism. Beyond the antitrust merit of this individual case, there is a possibility that the Chinese authorities used this case to signal displeasure to the U.S., which recently disallowed high-profile Chinese acquisitions in the U.S. Such signals may be mixed. In 2011, Yum Brands' acquisition of an iconic national chain restaurant Little Sheep Hot Pot, did receive approval from the Chinese antitrust authorities. Yum Brands thus could add Little Sheep to its successful restaurants such as Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pizza Hut in China. Far from being merely theoretical, this institution based debate has far reaching ramifications for the future of global competition. Business students and future managers should pay attention to this debate and be prepared to engage in it. Chapter 11, Section 7, Management Savvy. Let us revisit our fundamental question. What determines the success and failure in managing competitive dynamics around the world? Drawing on the two core perspectives, which is institution-based and resource-based views, we suggest that to manage competitive dynamics successfully, managers not only need to become masters of maneuvers, both confrontation and cooperation, but also experts in government regulations at home and abroad if they aspire to be successful globally. Consequently, three implications emerge for savvy managers. First, managers need to understand the rules of the game governing competition around the world. Aggressive language such as "let's beat competitors" may not be allowed in countries such as the US. Remember, an email, like a diamond, is forever, and deleted emails are still stored on servers and can be uncovered. However, carefully crafted ambitions such as Walmart's "we want to be number one in grocery business" are legal, because such wording, at least on paper, shows no illegal intention to destroy rivals. Too bad 31 U.S. supermarket chains declare bankruptcy since Walmart charged into groceries in the 90s. Just a tragic coincidence. Here's a look at Table 11.3, Implications for Action. Understand the rules of the game governing domestic and international competition around the world. Strengthen resources and capabilities to compete and/or cooperate more effectively. Develop skills in competitor analysis that guide decision-making on attacks, counterattacks, and cooperation. The necessity to understand the rules of the game is crucial when venturing abroad. What is legal domestically may be illegal elsewhere. Many Chinese managers are surprised that their low-cost strategy is labeled illegal dumping in the very countries advocating free market competition. In reality, free markets are not free. However, managers well versed in the rules of the game may launch subtle attacks without incurring the wrath of anti-dumping officials. Imports commanding less than 3% market share or below in a 12-month period are regarded by U.S. anti-dumping laws as negligible imports, not worthy of investigation. Thus, foreign firms not crossing such a red line would be safe. As an exporter, would you like to maintain a steady 3% of U.S. market share every year over 10 years, or a dramatic 30% upsurge in year 1, which would attract anti-dumping actions preventing further growth in year 2 and beyond? Second, managers need to strengthen capabilities that more effectively compete and/or cooperate. In attacks and counterattacks, subtlety, frequency, complexity, and unpredictability are helpful. In cooperation, market similarity and mutual forbearance may be better. As Sun Tzu advised a long time ago, as a manager, you need to know yourself, including your unit, your firm, and your industry.